The night Elena buried her mother, her husband was in another woman's bed. Not just any woman, her best friend. The same woman who held her while she cried at the funeral, who told her, "I'm here for you," while secretly sleeping with her husband for over a year. But that wasn't even the worst part, because what Elena didn't know was that this wasn't just cheating, it was planned. Her best friend had seen a name hidden in an old file, and became convinced Elena's mother wasn't who she claimed to be. So she did what no one expected. She didn't confront Elena, she studied her. She got closer. And then she took her life piece by piece. Her husband, her marriage, her future. But 3 months later, Elena opened a safety deposit box and discovered something so powerful that the two people who betrayed her had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. What they didn't realize was that Elena didn't fall apart after losing everything. She went quiet. And when Elena goes quiet, it means she's watching. Because 3 months after the funeral, she found the truth her mother died trying to protect. A truth worth billions. And suddenly, the woman they thought they had destroyed was no longer the victim in this story. She was the one holding all the power. But here's the real question. Did Daniel leave because he stopped loving her? Or because someone had already convinced him she was never worth staying for? And when Elena finally understood everything, she didn't scream. She didn't chase. She waited. Before I tell you what happened next, I'm curious. Where are you watching this from? And what time is it for you right now? Comment below because I read every single comment. Rain pressed against the hospital windows like it was trying to get in, the sky heavy and dark, as if it already knew something inside was about to end. Elena Carter sat beside the ICU bed, her fingers wrapped tightly around her mother's hand, as if holding on harder could somehow stop what was coming. She was a black woman in her early 30s, tall with a soft but defined frame, deep brown skin that carried a natural glow even under the cold fluorescent lights, her hair pulled back into a low, natural bun with loose curls escaping around her face, her features delicate but steady, the kind of face that had learned to stay calm even when everything inside was breaking. And right now, everything inside her was collapsing. On the bed lay Victoria Hale, her mother, a woman who had always carried herself with quiet dignity, now reduced to something fragile and still. Her once rich dark skin faded into a pale undertone, her silver-streaked black hair tucked loosely under the hospital pillow, her face lined not just with age, but with years of restraint, discipline, and secrets. Victoria had spent most of her life appearing ordinary, a retired schoolteacher who lived simply, spoke gently, and never once gave anyone a reason to suspect there was anything extraordinary about her. But there had always been something in her eyes, sharp, observant, calculating in a way Elena could never fully understand. "Mama, I'm here," Elena whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady, because for the first time in her life, she felt like a child again, small and unprotected in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. The machines around them hummed softly, each beep marking time in a way that felt cruel, like a countdown neither of them could stop. And Elena could feel the cold creeping into her mother's hand, a slow, terrifying reminder that she was already slipping away. Victoria's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened, and when her gaze met Elena's, it was not weak, it was clear, focused, almost urgent. And that alone sent a chill down Elena's spine, because this was not the look of someone giving up. It was the look of someone who had something important left to say. "Elena," her voice came out barely above a breath, rough and fragile, yet somehow controlled. "I'm here, Mama. I'm right here." Elena leaned closer, her heart pounding, afraid she might miss something, afraid this moment would be the last. Victoria's fingers tightened suddenly, a surprising strength returning to her grip, and Elena froze because it didn't feel like desperation. It felt deliberate. "Listen to me carefully," Victoria whispered, each word slow but intentional, like she was choosing them with precision. Elena nodded quickly, tears already gathering in her eyes. "There's a safety deposit box. Victoria continued, pausing to breathe through the pain. First Union Bank, box 918. Elena frowned, confusion cutting through her fear, because this wasn't what she expected to hear. Not now, not like this. Mama, don't worry about that, just rest, okay? But Victoria shook her head slightly, her eyes sharpening, and for a brief moment the fragile woman in the bed disappeared, replaced by someone Elena didn't fully recognize, someone stronger, colder, more commanding. The key is in my jewelry box, she said, her voice dropping even lower. Hidden compartment. You have to find it. Elena swallowed hard, something inside her tightening, a quiet instinct telling her this was bigger than it sounded. Okay, I will, I promise, she said quickly, trying to reassure her. But Victoria wasn't done. Her grip tightened again, pulling Elena closer, forcing her to lean in until she could feel her mother's breath against her ear. And Elena? There was a pause, long enough for Elena's heart to skip. Don't tell anyone. Elena blinked. What? Victoria's eyes locked onto hers, intense now, almost frightening in their clarity. Not Daniel, she said firmly. Elena Ross, her husband, was someone she trusted completely, a black man in his mid-30s with a sharp, structured face, clean-cut beard outlining his jaw, always dressed with precision like every detail of his appearance was calculated, confident, ambitious, the kind of man who spoke smoothly and knew how to navigate any room, but also someone who had grown increasingly distant over the past year in ways Elena had tried not to question. Not Daniel? Elena repeated, her voice barely audible. Victoria's expression didn't soften. And not Olivia. This time Elena's heart dropped. Olivia Bennett, her best friend since college, was everything Elena was not. A white woman with long blonde hair that fell effortlessly past her shoulders, tall and slender with sharp cheekbones, and a smile that could win over anyone within seconds. Stylish, confident, always moving like she belonged in every room she entered. And lately, she had been around more than ever, showing up unannounced, staying late, inserting herself into moments that should have been private. Why? Elena whispered, her mind racing, trying to understand. But Victoria only shook her head, her strength fading again. You'll understand, later, she murmured. Just promise me. Tears slid down Elena's face now, hot and uncontrollable. I promise, Mama, she said, her voice breaking. Victoria's expression softened at last, a faint smile touching her lips, and for a moment she looked like herself again. My strong girl, she whispered, you're stronger than you think. When the storm comes, stand. Mama, don't. The machines suddenly spiked. Sharp, piercing sounds filled the room. Doctors rushed in. Hands pulled Elena back. Voices overlapped. But Elena couldn't hear any of it clearly anymore, because something inside her had already gone quiet. She stood frozen, watching as they worked around her mother, knowing, before anyone said it, that this was the end. And then, just like that, Victoria Hale was gone. Elena stepped out into the hallway moments later, the world feeling distant, unreal, like she was watching everything through glass. And as she reached for her phone without thinking, the screen lit up with a message from Daniel. Still at the hospital? I'm heading out with some friends. Don't wait up. Elena stared at the words, her chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with grief. For the first time that night, her mother's warning didn't feel strange anymore. It felt necessary. And somewhere deep inside her, something shifted, quiet, cold, and irreversible. Because if Victoria had been right about Daniel, then what else had Elena been blind to all this time? The divorce papers were already signed before Daniel even asked for the conversation. Elena didn't know that yet, but she could feel it, the way a storm can be felt before the first drop hits the ground, that quiet pressure in the air that tells you something is about to break. Daniel Ross sat across from her in the living room, legs slightly apart, posture controlled, fingers interlocked like he had rehearsed this moment. He was a tall black man with a sharply defined jawline, his beard trimmed with almost obsessive precision, every line of his appearance calculated to project control and authority. A man who had built his identity around discipline after growing up in a household where chaos ruled. His father had been inconsistent, unreliable, and Daniel had sworn early in life that he would never be weak, never be emotional, never be at the mercy of anyone else's decisions. And now that same emotional detachment made him look less like a husband and more like a stranger. "I'm not happy anymore," he said, voice flat, almost bored, as if this was a business discussion and not the dismantling of a marriage. Elena stared at him, her mind still catching up, her chest tight not from anger yet, but from disbelief. "My mother died 10 days ago." Daniel exhaled slowly, eyes flicking away for half a second, the only crack in his composure. "I know the timing isn't ideal." Not ideal. That was the phrase he chose. Not cruel, not heartless, not devastating, just inconvenient. Elena felt something inside her shift, not break, not yet, but move, like a piece of her reality sliding out of place. She studied his face, searching for something familiar, some trace of the man she thought she knew, but all she saw was distance, calculation, and something else she couldn't quite name yet. "Is there someone else?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, Elena already knew. "It doesn't matter," he said finally, standing up, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, already preparing to leave the conversation like he had somewhere better to be. "This is the right decision." The right decision. Elena didn't stop him. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Because somewhere deep inside her, her mother's voice was already echoing. Don't trust him. 3 days later, Elena saw them. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even late at night. It was a quiet afternoon in a glass-walled cafe downtown, the kind of place where everything looks clean, controlled, and slightly too perfect to be real. Elena had come in for coffee she didn't really want, her body moving on autopilot, her mind still wrapped around grief, when she saw them sitting in the corner, Daniel and Olivia. Olivia Bennett leaned slightly forward in her chair, laughing at something Daniel had said, her hand resting lightly on his wrist like it belonged there. She was striking in the kind of way that drew attention without trying, tall and slim with long platinum blonde hair that fell in soft waves, her skin pale but luminous, her features sharp and symmetrical, the kind of beauty that didn't just attract, it disarmed, and beneath that beauty was a mind just as sharp, just as deliberate, a woman who had learned early that charm was a tool and proximity was power. Elena stood still, because this wasn't new. You don't laugh like that with someone new. You don't touch like that without history. You don't look that comfortable unless you've been there before. Her feet moved before she fully registered it, each step slow, controlled, almost detached, until she was standing at their table. Neither of them noticed her immediately. That hurt more than anything. "How long?" Elena asked. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Olivia's smile disappeared instantly, her face draining of color as she looked up, eyes wide, caught between guilt and calculation. "Elena." "How long?" she repeated, this time looking directly at Daniel. Daniel's jaw tightened. Olivia's fingers curled slightly against the table, her nails tapping once, twice, a nervous habit Elena had seen 100 times before, but never like this. It just happened," Olivia said quickly, her voice breaking in a way that might have sounded believable to anyone else, but not to Elena. Elena tilted her head slightly, studying her, and for the first time, really seeing her. Not her friend, not her support, not the woman who held her at the funeral, but someone else entirely. "After my mother died?" Elena asked softly. "Or before?" Silence. Daniel looked away. That was the answer. Elena felt it land inside her, not like a knife, not like a sharp pain, but like something colder, heavier, more permanent. A realization. This didn't start with grief. This didn't start with distance. This didn't start recently. This had been happening, while she was still whole. The truth didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, small details that didn't matter before, but now clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The late nights, the sudden work dinners, the way Olivia had started showing up more often, the way Daniel had stopped asking questions about Elena's life. And then, the detail that changed everything. A name. Victoria Hale. Olivia had seen it months ago. Not in Elena's house, not in a conversation, in a client file. Olivia worked occasionally with high-end clients, styling for events, networking her way into spaces where money moved quietly. And one night, while assisting on a private booking, she came across a list, names of investors, donors, quiet power players. And there it was, Victoria Hale. The name meant something. Not obvious, not public, but enough. Enough to trigger curiosity, enough to make Olivia look deeper. And once she did, she started seeing Elena differently, not as a friend, but as a possibility. She didn't tell Elena. She didn't ask questions. She didn't confront anything. She got closer. She watched. She tested. And eventually, she made a decision. If Elena was connected to something bigger, then Danielle was the fastest way in. "Elena, I never meant," Olivia started, her voice softer now, shifting into something more controlled, more strategic. But Elena raised her hand slightly, not to stop her, just to signal something else. She understood now. Not everything, but enough. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't emotional weakness. This wasn't even love. This was calculation. And the worst part? They had walked away, because whatever they were looking for, they hadn't found it. Elena stepped back slowly. No tears, no anger, no scene, just a quiet shift in her posture. "You should have stayed," she said calmly. Both of them looked at her, confused. "What?" Danielle asked. Elena's lips curved, not into a smile, but something close. "You should have stayed longer." For a brief second, neither of them understood. And then, something in Olivia's expression flickered. A question, a doubt. Too late. Elena turned and walked out of the cafe. Behind her, the world continued as if nothing had happened. But inside her, everything had changed. Because now she knew two things for certain. Her mother had been right, and whatever was in that safety deposit box was the reason all of this had started. And for the first time since her mother died, Elena wasn't just grieving anymore. She was thinking. And when Elena started thinking, people got hurt. Because if Olivia had been willing to destroy her life over a name, then what exactly was waiting inside box 918 that made it worth betraying her for? By the time Elena opened safety deposit box 918, her entire life had already been dismantled. Her husband was gone. Her best friend had replaced her. And the only person who might have explained any of it was buried. What Elena didn't know yet was that everything she thought she had lost was nothing compared to what she was about to gain. The bank didn't look like the kind of place that held secrets worth destroying lives over. First Union sat quietly on a corner street, its red brick exterior worn but polished, the kind of building that survived decades by never drawing attention to itself. Inside, the air was cool and controlled, marble floors reflecting the soft overhead lights, everything clean, silent, and precise, in a way that made Elena feel like she had stepped into a place where mistakes weren't allowed. She walked up to the front desk, her movements steady, her face composed in a way that masked the tension building underneath. "I need access to a safety deposit box," she said, placing the small brass key on the counter. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with short silver hair and sharp, attentive eyes, glanced down at the key, then at Elena, her polite expression shifting, just slightly, into something more cautious. "May I see your ID?" Elena handed it over. The woman typed for a moment, then stopped. Her posture straightened. "Just a moment, Ms. Carter." She disappeared into the back. Elena felt it immediately, that same quiet pressure again, the kind that meant something was about to change. A man emerged a minute later, Gerald Whitmore. He introduced himself calmly, his voice measured, controlled, the kind of voice that came from years of handling things that weren't meant to be discussed casually. He was in his early 60s, tall but slightly stooped with age, his gray hair neatly combed back, his suit immaculate but understated, and his eyes were the kind that didn't miss details, the kind that had seen enough to know when something mattered. "Miss Carter," he said, offering a brief nod, "please follow me." He didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He simply led her down a narrow hallway lined with steel deposit boxes embedded into the walls like silent witnesses. They stopped at box 918. He inserted his key, she inserted hers. The lock clicked. And just like that, everything shifted. Inside, there was no jewelry, no cash, no heirlooms, just a thick manila envelope, heavy, deliberate, waiting. Gerald stepped back, his tone neutral but distant now. "You may review the contents in private." Elena nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around the envelope as she carried it into a small room. The door closed behind her. Silence. She sat down and opened it. The first thing she saw wasn't the letter. It was numbers, pages of them, stock certificates, property deeds, account summaries, legal ownership structures, names she didn't recognize, companies she had never heard of, cities across continents, London, Dubai, Singapore, New York. Elena flipped through them slowly, her breathing beginning to change, each page pulling her further away from the life she thought she understood. This wasn't hidden savings. This wasn't a retirement fund. This was something else entirely. At the bottom of the stack was the letter. Her hands hesitated for a moment before opening it, as if some part of her already knew that whatever was written inside would erase everything that came before it. She unfolded it carefully. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, controlled, every line precise. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and it is finally time you knew the truth." Elena's throat tightened. "I was never just a teacher. My name was never just Victoria Hale in the way you understood it. That name carries weight, power, history." Elena's eyes moved faster now. "I founded Hale Capital 32 years ago. What started as a small private fund became something much larger than I ever allowed the world to see." Her fingers trembled. "Everything in that envelope is yours." Elena stopped, looked back at the documents, then back at the letter. Estimated value, $12.4 billion. The number didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. It didn't connect to anything she had ever experienced. Her mother, the woman who reused grocery bags, who wore the same coats for years, who told her to save everything, had been worth more than entire corporations. Elena leaned back slowly, her mind trying to catch up, but the letter wasn't finished. "But Elena, the money is not the most important part. The most important part is this. You must be careful who you trust." Her chest tightened. "Some people will come close to you not because they love you, but because they believe you are connected to something valuable. Daniel, Olivia. If they have already shown you who they are, believe them." Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. Everything aligned. Not emotionally, not dramatically, logically, clean, cold, clear. Daniel hadn't just fallen out of love. Olivia hadn't just made a mistake. They had been searching, watching, waiting. And when they didn't find what they wanted, they left. Too soon. Elena let out a slow breath, something inside her settling. Not pain, not anger, but something sharper. Understanding. She gathered the documents again, this time more carefully, more deliberately. Every page mattered now. Every number meant something. Every line was power. When she stepped out of the room, Gerald Whitmore was waiting. Not impatient, just present, observing. "Is everything in order?" he asked. Elena met his gaze. For the first time since entering the bank, she didn't feel uncertain. "Yes," she said quietly. Gerald studied her for a moment longer than necessary, then gave a small nod. "Your mother was a very strategic woman." That was the word he chose, strategic. Elena almost smiled, because now she understood something else too. Her mother hadn't just hidden wealth. She had created a test, and Daniel and Olivia had both failed it. Elena walked out of the bank into the daylight, the envelope tucked under her arm, the world looking exactly the same and yet completely different. Cars passed, people moved, nothing had changed, except everything had. She paused on the sidewalk, pulling her phone out slowly. Daniel's name still sat at the top of her messages, Olivia's just below it. Two people who thought they had taken everything from her. Elena stared at their names for a long moment, then locked her phone. No calls, no messages, no explanations. Because for the first time, Elena wasn't reacting anymore. She was deciding. And the difference between those two things was everything. Because the moment Elena realized what she owned, she stopped asking why they betrayed her. She started asking something else. How much would it cost to make them regret it? The most dangerous thing about Elena Carter wasn't her anger. It was the fact that no one could see it anymore. Because after the divorce, after the betrayal, after the funeral, Elena didn't fight. She vanished. From the outside, her life looked exactly like what Daniel and Olivia expected. Quiet, small, insignificant. Elena still lived in the same apartment, a modest space with neutral tones and minimal decoration, the kind of place that felt more functional than expressive, as if she had always been careful not to take up too much space in the world. Her routines didn't change much either. She still went to work, still answered emails, still smiled politely when spoken to, her voice soft, controlled, almost fragile, the kind of woman people assumed had been broken, but was trying her best to hold herself together. And that was exactly what she wanted them to see. What they didn't see was what happened when the doors closed. At night, Elena sat at her dining table, no longer scrolling mindlessly through her phone, no longer replaying memories that hurt. Instead, the table was covered in documents, financial reports, ownership structures, investment portfolios. Every single piece of information from the envelope now reorganized, categorized, understood. She had always been intelligent, but this was different. This was precision. Across from her sat Gerald Whitmore, his presence calm but authoritative, his posture straight despite his age, his hands folded neatly as he watched Elena absorb information at a pace that surprised even him. He had worked with powerful people his entire life, men and women who inherited wealth, built empires, destroyed competitors. But what he saw in Elena was something rarer, someone who learned fast, adapted faster, and didn't waste energy on emotion when there was strategy to be built. "You're not asking the questions most people would ask," Gerald noted quietly. Elena didn't look up from the document in front of her. "Most people don't matter," she replied. Gerald's lips pressed into a faint line. Interesting. Meanwhile, Daniel Ross was celebrating. The engagement party was everything Elena would have hated. Loud, flashy, overcrowded with people who didn't actually know the couple, but wanted to be seen knowing them. Daniel stood at the center of it all, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his posture confident, his smile wide, the kind of man who looked like he had just upgraded his life. Beside him stood Olivia Bennett, radiant in a fitted white dress that highlighted her tall, slender frame, her blonde hair styled in effortless waves, her hand resting on Daniel's arm as if she had always belonged there. And to them, this was victory. "You did the right thing," Olivia murmured, leaning slightly toward Daniel, her voice low, smooth, reassuring. Daniel nodded, taking a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room, already thinking about what came next. Bigger clients, better opportunities, a life that felt more aligned with the version of himself he believed he deserved. "Elena wasn't moving forward," he said, almost casually. Olivia smiled faintly. No guilt, no hesitation. Because in her mind, this had never been betrayal. It had been strategy. Olivia had always understood something Daniel didn't fully grasp. Proximity was power, and she had positioned herself perfectly. She had watched Elena closely, studied her habits, her conversations, her silences, and when she realized that Elena might be connected to something larger, something hidden, she made her move. Not impulsively, carefully, patiently. But now, standing in that room, surrounded by luxury and validation, Olivia felt something else too. A flicker, a question she couldn't fully silence. Why had Elena let go so easily? She pushed the thought away, because it didn't make sense, because it didn't fit the narrative she had built, because if Elena had anything worth holding on to, she would have fought. Right? Back in her apartment, Elena closed another file. Her expression didn't change, but her understanding did. Hale Capital wasn't just money, it was influence, control, access. A network of companies layered through holding structures, silent partnerships, and indirect ownerships that touched industries Daniel interacted with every day without ever realizing it. Elena leaned back slightly, her fingers tapping once against the table. A habit, not of anxiety, of calculation. Daniel's firm, she said calmly, finally looking at Gerald. Who are their largest external partners? Gerald didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, because that question was not a beginner's question. 3 primary investment pipelines, Gerald replied, his tone measured. One of them accounts for nearly 40% of their revenue. Elena nodded slowly. Who controls it? Gerald held her gaze for a moment longer, then answered, We do. Silence filled the room. Not heavy, not dramatic, just precise. Elena looked back down at the documents, and for the first time, a faint, almost invisible shift touched her expression. Not a smile, but something close to satisfaction. Across the city, Daniel raised his glass, laughter echoing around him as Olivia leaned into his side, their world bright, loud, full of movement and validation. They believed they had stepped into something better, something bigger. They had no idea. They had just stepped onto ground that didn't belong to them. Elena closed the final file and stood up slowly, walking toward the window, the city lights stretching endlessly before her, each one representing a life, a decision, a consequence. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Not broken, not lost, different. They think I have nothing left, she said quietly. Gerald didn't respond. He didn't need to. Elena's gaze hardened slightly, her voice calm, controlled, and final. Good, because invisibility was the most powerful position she had ever been in. Because while Daniel and Olivia were celebrating their future, they didn't realize Elena had just found the one thing that could quietly take it all away. Daniel didn't lose everything overnight. That would have been mercy. What Elena gave him was something far worse, a slow collapse. So quiet, he didn't even realize it had started. The first sign was small enough to ignore. A client didn't return his call. Then another delayed a meeting. Then a third, one of his most reliable accounts, suddenly restructured their investment pipeline without explanation. Daniel sat in his office, staring at his screen, his jaw tightening slightly, his fingers tapping once against the desk in irritation. He was used to control, to predictability, to systems that responded to him the way they always had. And when they didn't, his first instinct wasn't panic, it was dismissal. Temporary, fixable, not a problem. But problems don't announce themselves loudly when they're designed. They spread quietly. Across the city, Elena Carter was sitting in a conference room that didn't have her name on it. Not officially, not visibly, but everything inside it answered to her. The room was sleek, minimal, built for people who made decisions that affected markets without ever being seen. And at the far end of the table sat Marcus LeBlanc, a man in his early 40s with a composed but imposing presence, his light brown skin smooth against the sharp lines of his face, his beard trimmed short but not perfectly, deliberately imperfect, like someone who didn't need precision to command authority. His eyes were calm, analytical, the kind that didn't react emotionally but calculated outcomes. And years earlier, a failed merger had taught him one thing: never assume stability means safety. Marcus didn't work for Elena, not exactly. He worked within the system she now controlled, and he knew it. "You're asking us to pull 40% of their liquidity access," Marcus said, his voice low, steady, not questioning, just confirming. Elena sat across from him, posture relaxed, her expression neutral, her presence quiet but absolute. She didn't dress like power, didn't speak like power, but the room adjusted to her anyway. "I'm asking you to let their dependency expose itself," she corrected softly. Marcus studied her for a moment, then leaned back slightly. Interesting. Because this wasn't aggression. This was patience weaponized. Within 2 weeks, Daniel's firm began to feel it. Not a crash, a shift. Revenue projections dipped slightly, then more noticeably. Internal meetings became more frequent, then more tense. "Why are we losing pipeline volume?" The question came from Thomas Green, Daniel's senior partner, a tall white man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a reputation built on decades of aggressive deal-making. Thomas was not patient, not forgiving, and certainly not someone who tolerated uncertainty, his voice sharp, his gaze cutting through the room like a blade. Daniel sat across from him, shoulders squared, trying to maintain composure. "It's temporary," he said. Thomas didn't blink. "Temporary doesn't cost us $8 million in projected revenue." Silence. Daniel felt it then, the first crack. He worked longer hours, made more calls, pushed harder. But the harder he pushed, the more resistance he met, because the system hadn't failed him, it had moved around him. Meanwhile, Olivia Bennett's world began to shift in a different way. At first, it was subtle. A client canceled. Then another postponed indefinitely. Then a third, one of her most high-profile connections, sent a brief, polite message ending their collaboration with no explanation. Olivia stared at her phone, her brows tightening slightly, her mind moving faster than her emotions, trying to identify patterns, inconsistencies, disruptions. She had built her career on access, on relationships, on knowing how to stay valuable in rooms where value was constantly shifting. And when that value began to disappear, she noticed. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered quietly to herself. Across town, inside a private agency office she had never visited, her name had already been moved, from active to restricted, then quietly to avoided. The decision came from Evelyn Carter, not related to Elena, just coincidence in name, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features, dark straight hair cut into a clean bob, her skin pale but flawless, her demeanor controlled to the point of intimidation. Evelyn ran one of the most influential client networks in the city, the kind that didn't advertise, didn't explain, and didn't reverse decisions once they were made. "Why her?" a junior associate had asked. Evelyn didn't look up from her tablet. "Because she's no longer aligned with our clients' interests." That was all. No scandal, no warning, just removal. And Olivia felt it immediately. 3 weeks later, she sat in her apartment, her perfectly styled appearance starting to crack at the edges, her hair less controlled, her posture tighter, her phone in her hand as she dialed Daniel. "They're cutting me off," she said the moment he answered, her voice strained despite her effort to stay composed. Daniel rubbed his forehead, eyes closed, already exhausted. "Olivia, I'm in the middle of something." "I'm serious," she snapped, sharper now. "Clients are dropping me. No explanation, no pattern. It's like—" She stopped, because the thought forming in her head didn't make sense. Daniel exhaled heavily. "I can't deal with this right now," he said, his tone flat, distracted, already overwhelmed by his own problems. Silence. Olivia's grip tightened around her phone. Something shifted. Not fear, not yet. Recognition. Because she had seen this before. Not exactly like this, but close enough. Patterns disappearing, access closing, doors shutting quietly instead of loudly. That wasn't random. That was controlled. "Daniel," she said slowly, her voice lower now. But he had already hung up. And just like that, the man she had chosen over Elena started to feel less like an upgrade. Across the city, Elena stood by the window again, the same calm expression, the same stillness, but now the first move had already been made. "No direct contact," she said quietly to Gerald. "No exposure." Gerald nodded once. "They're destabilizing." Elena's gaze remained fixed on the city lights. "Not yet," she replied, because this wasn't about destruction. It was about realization. Because the moment Olivia started recognizing the pattern was the moment the game truly began. And this time, she wasn't the one in control anymore. The first time Daniel realized something was truly wrong was the night he saw Elena again. Not as his ex-wife, not as the woman he left behind, but as someone he no longer recognized. The gala was not the kind of event you could accidentally attend. It was invitation only, curated, and deliberately exclusive, held in a grand ballroom layered with soft gold lighting and polished marble floors that reflected every movement like a stage. The air carried the quiet hum of wealth, low voices, controlled laughter, subtle power exchanges. and every person in the room belonged there for a reason. Daniel almost hadn't been invited. That alone should have told him something. He stood near the back of the room, adjusting his cufflinks, his posture still sharp but no longer effortless, his movements carrying a tension that hadn't been there before. The past few weeks had changed him. Less confident, more reactive, his usual control slipping in ways he couldn't explain, and even in a room full of opportunity, he felt slightly out of place. Beside him, Olivia Bennet remained composed on the surface, her posture straight, her expression carefully neutral. But the details betrayed her, her fingers clasped too tightly, her gaze scanning the room not with confidence but with calculation. She wore a sleek black dress that framed her tall, slender body, her blonde hair styled perfectly as always, but her eyes were sharper tonight, more alert, because something inside her had already shifted. She didn't belong here the way she used to. "Who's the sponsor?" Daniel asked quietly, glancing toward the stage where a large screen displayed the name of the evening's primary benefactor. Olivia narrowed her eyes slightly. "I don't know," she murmured. But that wasn't true. She was trying to figure it out faster than she wanted to admit. Then the lights shifted. The room softened. Attention redirected. A voice came over the speakers. "Please welcome the primary sponsor of tonight's event." A pause. Long enough to create anticipation. "Elena Carter." Silence. Not loud, not dramatic, but complete. Daniel didn't move. At first, his brain rejected it. The name didn't fit the space, didn't fit the moment, didn't fit the version of her he had stored in his mind. Then she stepped onto the stage. Elena Carter. She walked with the same calm presence she had always had, but now it carried weight. She wore a deep emerald gown that flowed naturally with her movement, the color contrasting beautifully against her rich brown skin, her hair styled in soft, defined curls that framed her face, her posture straight, grounded, her expression composed, unreadable, not cold, not warm, just certain. Daniel felt something drop inside his chest. Not guilt, not yet. Shock. Because this wasn't the woman he left. This was someone else entirely. Olivia's breath caught almost imperceptibly. Her eyes didn't leave the stage. Now it made sense. Not fully, but enough. Elena stood at the podium, her voice steady, controlled, her tone neither performative nor emotional, just clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. The room listened, not politely, attentively. Daniel swallowed, because the room wasn't reacting to her name. It was reacting to her presence, and that meant something had changed long before this moment. Elena continued, speaking briefly about the foundation, about opportunity, about access, words that sounded simple but carried weight when spoken by someone who clearly understood their value. Then she finished. No dramatic pause, no attempt to impress, just done. Applause followed, controlled, respectful, real. And then she stepped down from the stage. Daniel didn't remember deciding to move, but suddenly he was walking toward her. "Elena?" She turned, slowly. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he realized something terrifying. She wasn't surprised to see him. She expected it. "If I had known," Daniel started, his voice lower now, less controlled than he intended. Elena tilted her head slightly, not confused, curious. "No," she said calmly. One word, sharp, final. Daniel blinked. "What?" Elena's gaze didn't shift. "If you had known," she repeated softly, "you would have stayed longer." Silence. The meaning landed slowly, then all at once. Daniel's expression changed, because she was right. Olivia stepped forward then, unable to stay back any longer, her composure cracking just slightly as she looked at Elena, not as a friend, not as a rival, but as something she hadn't accounted for. "I'm sorry," Olivia said. The words sounded right, but they didn't feel right. Elena looked at her, really looked at her, and for a brief moment, there was something almost like recognition. Then it disappeared. "You're not sorry you hurt me," Elena said quietly. Olivia's breath caught. "You're sorry," Elena continued, her voice calm, precise, "that you miscalculated." The word hung in the air, heavy, accurate. Olivia didn't respond, because she couldn't, because that was exactly what had happened. Daniel looked between them, something inside him unraveling, not fully, not yet, but enough to create discomfort, enough to plant doubt, enough to make him realize that the version of reality he had built might not be the real one. Elena stepped back slightly. No anger, no bitterness, no need, because she wasn't there to confront them. She was there to be seen. And now they had. For the first time, they understood the scale of their mistake, but not the consequences. Not yet. Elena turned away, walking back into the crowd, disappearing just as quietly as she had appeared. Daniel stood still. Olivia didn't move, because something had changed in a way they couldn't undo. Because now that they finally knew who Elena really was, the only question left was, how much had they already lost, without even realizing it? Chapter 7. He finally understood. Too late. Daniel didn't realize he had already lost everything, until he tried to get it back. And for the first time in his life, no one was willing to listen. The termination didn't feel real at first. It came in a clean envelope, a controlled tone, a short meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. But the aftermath, that was where it hit. Daniel sat alone in his car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, his reflection staring back at him through the dark glass. And for the first time in years, he looked like a man who had miscalculated. Not because he wasn't capable, but because he had underestimated something he never thought could rise above him. Elena. The name didn't feel the same anymore. Back at his apartment, the silence was louder than anything else. The expensive furniture, the polished surfaces, the life he thought he had upgraded into, now felt hollow, like something borrowed that was about to be taken back. He paced slowly, running through every possibility, every connection, every deal that had collapsed over the past weeks, and every path led to the same conclusion. This wasn't coincidence. This was control. And there was only one person who could have done it this precisely. He grabbed his phone, scrolled, stopped. Elena. For a brief moment, his thumb hesitated. Then he called. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. He called again. Nothing. The third time, it didn't even ring. Blocked. Daniel stared at the screen, something tightening in his chest. Not anger, something worse. Irrelevance. Because for the first time, he wasn't being ignored out of emotion. He was being removed. Across the city, Olivia Bennett sat on the edge of her bed, her posture no longer controlled, her usual precision gone, her blonde hair falling loosely around her face without structure, her makeup slightly smudged, her phone in her hand as she refreshed her email again and again, hoping, irrationally, that something would change. Nothing did. No clients, no messages, no opportunities. Just silence. And silence was something Olivia had never learned how to handle, because her entire life had been built on response, on attention, on access. Now, she had none of it. Her mind replayed everything, the files she had seen, the name that triggered everything, the decision to get closer, to manipulate, to take what she thought was hidden value, and for the first time, she saw the flaw. She had assumed that if Elena had something valuable, she would have shown it, but Elena hadn't, and that was the difference. Olivia stood up suddenly, grabbing her coat, her movements sharp, desperate now, her heels hitting the floor too hard, too fast, as if urgency alone could undo what had already happened. She knew where Elena would be, because people like Elena didn't hide forever. They rose. The Hale Capitol building didn't feel like a place Olivia belonged in. Even before she reached the top floor, she could feel it. The shift in energy, the quiet control, the kind of environment where nothing happened by accident. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped out into a space that was almost too calm, too precise, her reflection briefly catching in the glass walls as she approached the reception desk. Behind it sat a young woman, mid-20s, dark skin, hair neatly braided back, posture straight, her expression polite but unreadable, trained to filter, not assist. "I'm here to see Elena Carter," Olivia said, trying to regain composure. The receptionist glanced at her once, then typed, paused, looked back up. "I'm sorry," she said calmly. "Ms. Carter isn't available." Olivia stepped closer. "This is important." The receptionist didn't move. "I understand," she replied evenly, "but she's still not available." That was it. No escalation, no explanation, no access. Olivia stood there for a moment longer before realizing something that hit harder than anything else. This wasn't a rejection, it was a system, and she wasn't in it anymore. Inside the office, Elena stood by the window, the city stretching endlessly beneath her, her reflection steady, unchanged, her presence grounded in a way that no longer required validation. Gerald Whitmore stood behind her, silent as always. "She came," he said simply. Elena didn't turn. "I know," she replied. A pause. "She wants to speak to you." Elena's gaze remained fixed on the skyline. "She already did," she said calmly. Gerald didn't respond, because he understood. That conversation had already happened, weeks ago, in choices, in actions, in consequences. Elena walked back to her desk, placing a final document down. The foundation. $200 million. Signed. Activated. Something new. Something clean. Something that had nothing to do with the past. Her phone lit up briefly. Daniel, calling again. She glanced at it, then turned the screen face down, because there was nothing left to revisit. Not the betrayal, not the loss, not them. They had already removed themselves. And now, Elena was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because she fought harder, but because she saw clearer. Because in the end, they didn't lose Elena. They lost the version of life that only existed because she was in it. And by the time they understood that, they had already been erased from it completely. And here's the truth. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means someone is watching, waiting, and choosing the right moment. If this story hit you, comment, "I see you now," below, and subscribe for more stories like this, because the next one might be closer to your life than you think.